It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew a version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic. Well, you know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing. That's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out the links in the description. I'd appreciate it so much. But today, we're continuing celebrating Innistrad with Innistrad Remastered Release, looking at a bunch of commanders over Innistrad's history. And today, we're finally taking a look at Grolnok the Omnivore, a Simic frog that says whenever a frog we control attacks, we're going to mill 3 cards. Whenever a permanent is put into our graveyard from our library, we get to exile it with a Croak counter on it. And as long as Grolnok's out, we can play lands and cast spells from among the cards we own in exile with Croak counters on them. A very interesting way, right, to extend our hand, get access to more cards to play, and build our board state from there. So we're going to play frogs. Obviously, the more frogs that attacks, the more we mill, the more we could put right into exile to play. We're going to play some of the ways to win if we deck ourselves out, if we go too deep and we need to take care of that. And then we're talking about ways we're just going to profit from milling cards so we can continue to build value for our board. But I think the first obvious thing to talk about is frogs, right? There's so many great frogs, especially with Bloomburrow just being released. Things like Clement, letting our frogs tap for mana to cast other creatures, which is pretty cool. And then Clement says whenever it or another creature comes in, we can return one target creature we control with lesser mana value to its hand. There are some cheap frogs that have some great abilities that happen on ETB, so we can bounce them and put them back in our hand. Clifftop Retreat lets us reveal top until we hit a land and put it on the battlefield tapped to put the rest on the bottom. Downport Mage says whenever one or more creatures we control leave the battlefield without dying, we get to draw a card and we can tap it to put a creature back into its owner's hand. So not a bad way to bounce a frog to draw a card if need be. Dream Druid Enchanter can come in and tap a creature and put a couple stun counters on it. If we control that creature, we actually get to draw 2. So this could pair really well with those frogs that can bounce, right? Froghemoth, a big threat, can get bigger when we attack somebody and exile cards from their graveyard. Lily Splash Mentor lets us blink another creature, and it comes in with a Pulse counter on it. So again, a great way to get some of these frogs, their ETB abilities again. Mistbreath Elder says at the beginning of our upkeep, we can return another creature we control to our hand. If we do, it gets a counter on it. Otherwise, we can return it back to our hand. So a good way to get a cheap frog in return if we want to. Octomancer lets us create a token that's a copy of a creature token that entered the battlefield this turn. So every turn, if our opponent makes creature tokens, right, we can get some access to their tokens. Poison Dart Frog's there as a way for us to get mana and have it be a death touch threat just in case. Polywog Prodigy has Evolve, and it says whenever our opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than its power, we get to draw a card. So we can make the Prodigy bitter and potentially draw some cards. Gargantua is a potential late-game threat. It gets +10/+10 for each player who lost the game. And it says whenever we deal combat damage to a player, we can mill that many cards and put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped. The way that these effects like Rampant Gargantua are going to work with Grolnok is because actually they're in Gargantua's ability. Putting them back on the battlefield tapped is part of its ability. Grolnok wouldn't even have its ability trigger, so we will be able to get around that. We'll talk about the same with a card or two later. Sunshower Druid, when it enters, you put a counter on a creature and gain a life. A great thing to bounce with some of these abilities if we have the options to. Three Cheer Cried says whenever it or another creature leaves the battlefield without dying, you put a counter on a creature you control. So again, taking advantage of this blink type stuff. 20-Toed Toad's an interesting one, increasing our max hand size, but it says whenever we attack with 2 or more creatures, we put a counter on it and draw a card. And whenever it attacks, we win the game if there are 20 more counters on it or 20 more cards in hand. So if we have a bunch of ways to draw and hold cards in our hand, we can potentially win the game that way. And then Vowling Might Collar just puts a counter on itself whenever another frog comes in. It can become a big threat right over the course of a game. Again, here are just in case options in case we dig too deep. There's something like Gaia's Blessing, which can just shuffle our whole graveyard back into our library. We're also playing Jace and Laboratory Maniac, which both say if we were to draw a card while our library has no cards in it, we actually get to win the game. So that's really helpful, especially if we want to go really deep with all of our frogs, right? Milling and milling and milling more cards. But I think there's other ways to take advantage of the milling. It's not just playing things, right? Willow Geist says whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, we put a counter on it. So Grolnok's going to take all those permanents and mill them, right? Meaning, or take all those permanents that got milled and put them into exile. So Willow's going to get big, and we gain life equal to its power when it dies. Desecrated Tomb says whenever one or more creature cards leave our graveyard, we make a bat. So again, if those permanents are creatures, right, we're going to make some bats. Head Shredder says whenever one or more land cards are put into the graveyard from your library, we can put them on the battlefield tap. Now, the way that I read Grolnok and the way that I read Head Shredder is that when I mill 3 cards with the frogs, it's going to trigger multiple abilities with Head Shredder and Grolnok out. Now, to my understanding, you put Head Shredder above it and actually bring all those lands back in tapped, and then put the rest of the permanents into exile, so we can kind of prevent ourselves from having to always play lands from exile and kind of get around it, but still get really helpful. Crawling Infestation and Crawling Sensation both allow us to mill cards on our upkeep, but each of them have an ability that whenever one or more of a certain type are put into our graveyard from anywhere, we get something. So the Crawling Infestation can make us an insect once per turn. The Sensation does it for lands, but same thing. But hey, getting an extra token every turn could be helpful over the course of the game. And then Tale of Tameo is kind of interesting. For the first 3 portions of the saga, we're going to go ahead and mill 2. And if the 2 cards share a type, we get to draw a card and repeat it. And then we get to 4, we get to take any number of target instant, sorcery, or planeswalker cards from your graveyard, copy them, and cast the copies. So, because, remember, Grolnok's leaving instants and sorceries in the graveyard, Tale of Tameo, once it gets to 4, could potentially cast us a lot of things out of our graveyard and get big value. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is our version 1.0 shot at Grolnok. I think there's a lot to learn in testing. My first thought was, is something like Eldritch Evolution and Neoform good for the deck to take our small frogs and get into our big frogs or something like that? I think that's always an option when you're dealing with a certain type. Polywallop, is just an example of a thing in green we have for fighting instead of removing if we can get our frogs big enough. And then we are playing some Alpha Strikey type cards, but we could play more of them, things like Finale Devastation or Triumph of Hordes, to make sure our frogs are hitting hard. There's a lot of ways to look at winning the game other than just trying to mill ourselves out or swarming the board. I think that's something we would consider going into testing. How is our deck accomplishing it, and how do we make it better in the process? So let's get into our playtests. Our first one here, keep it a 4-lander with Oak Village, 2 Forests, and a Floyd Grove. We see Season of Weaving, the Gargantua, and Fisher's Talent. So Fisher's Talent's at the beginning of your upkeep. We can look at the top card. We can reveal if it's a land. If we do, we make a fish and then draw a card. And then we can level up to eventually start making either a shark or a big octopus, over the course of each turn. So there's a way to get some extra bodies on the board, right? Well, turn 1, I don't really see us being able to do too much, right? Nothing with a 1-drop in our hand. Turn 2, we see the Desecrated Tomb. So there we go. That could start being used once Grolnok comes out. Again, nothing here. We just go into turn 3. I think, the Gargantua could make sense. That way next turn when we play Grolnok, right, it could start attacking and milling us some cards. We could also play the Tomb and kind of prepare that way. I think the Gargantua makes the most sense, mainly because then we could start milling and putting lands from those milled cards back. Because again, from my understanding of the way that the Gargantua works is because that text is put any number of them from on the battlefield tapped is a part of that ability. It means when that ability happens, we're going to do all of it before it finishes. So I would attack here, mill 3. Now on the attack, right, that's not going to affect Gargantua's bottom ability. So we're going to get all 3 of those bad boys, exile the Croak counter. And then Gargantua was going to hit. And now if it hits, we can do that. It may not. But the point is we still want to attack, right, to get the mill off. Now we've got access to some great things, especially Head Shredder, right? Head Shredder seems like a great thing to get down. Again, to start taking those lands back as we're milling and attacking. And the nice part is Head Shredder doesn't have to attack to do that. But if we do crew it, right, it's a 5/5 that isn't a bad attacker. So here on turn 5, so that Head Shredder's 4 mana, right? We do have a forest, so I guess I could have played a forest out of exile, but I didn't think about it. I mean, my gut tells me something like the Shredder and just try to go deep, right? Try to get a bunch of lands off our 2 attacks this turn with frogs, right? And just try to get a bunch of extra lands on the battlefield. So that's my thought. We have a mana left. that I can't do anything quite with yet. But I think I would go and just attack. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then remember, right, by my account, we can just do this instead of putting them in exile. With the Hedge Shredder, that's going to go in exile. We actually managed to hit all permanents, which is great. Those come in taps, so obviously we can't use them this turn, but that's a-okay. Gargantua may potentially hit here. If not, no worries. The point is now, right, now we're ramping. We're going to be able to start playing some of our bigger spells. Turn 6, untapping with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana, because we'd have to crack the Evolving Wilds, right, to go get a land, but we'll do that in a second. 8 mana, lots of things. Note that Grolnok is not limited to once per turn. We can just play as many of them as we want. Dock's pretty great because it's going to allow these to be, right, a couple less. Even though it's not a frog, it is going to help us play things for cheaper. So I'm thinking Dock, 6 mana left. The Scribe is 1, the Occlumencer's 3. We could play the Transmutation for some removal, right, on our opponent's creatures if we want to. We haven't played our land for turn either. The Scribe could, crew the Hedge Shredder this turn. That was 2 for Dock, 1 for the Scribe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana left. Season of Weaving is a card that might look odd, but I kind of like it. You can draw, you can make copies of things, you can return everything back to their opponent's hands if you want to. Here, I think I'd love to make something like 2 Gargantuas, right? Just make big, real threats to our opponents, right, that they have to deal with. So we'll crack the Evolving Wilds. I guess we'll just go get an island. So if I do this, I would probably go double copy the Froggantua and draw a card, maybe, just to get some more Froggantuas around and get some more threats to our opponents. Move to attack, right? I would crew the Hedge Shredder probably with 3 Tree Scribe just so it can attack. So I'm going to have, the Froggantua, the Grolnok, and that attack. So I'm going to mill 2 from the Hedge Shredder. Get those both in tap. 3 from Gargantua, and then 3. Oh, great, just hitting all the lands. And I think this is where the deck's going to exceed, is just having so much mana to dump it. Continue to take these big turns where we play more from exile. But let's get into playtest number 2. Keep in a 3-land of a Spore Frog, Mistbreath Elder, the Infestation, and Azusa, a way to play multiple lands per turn, right? Especially if we're playing them from exile. I guess we could play Mistbreath Elder. I mean, we don't really have much else to do turn 1. I guess we could also play the Spore Frog, but turn 2, I don't see anything, but we can just play the Spore Frog, just get some things down. Turn 3, we have the Infestation or Azusa. I think we'll play the Infestation just so next turn when we attack with our frogs, if we want to, we can do that. Guess we could bounce the Spore Frog back to put a counter on Mistbreath Elder, right? Make it a little bit better for next turn when we attack. So this turn, I still want to bounce anything back. I don't really want to mill with the Infestation, especially not while Grolnok's not out, just so we could take advantage of it. But here I would attack with that. Mill 3. We did not hit any creatures, so the Infestation doesn't go off, right? But we do get access to all of those things. Now, at the start of our turn, Mistbreath could bounce a creature back, put a counter on it, but I don't think I really want to do that quite yet. We might as well play one of our lands from exile. Perpetual Timepiece is interesting, allowing us to mill 2 cards by tapping it. I think I would just Hedge Shredder and then Spore Frog, right? Spore Frog can crew the Hedge Shredder. Well, it can't because it just came in, so I'll have to do that next turn. My thought here is that Spore Frog can now be something that Mistbreath can bounce every turn just by growing itself. Move to combat, probably attack with those 2. Again, we get the lands back with Hedge Shredder, and then we're going to make an insect because of the Crawling Infestation. All 3 of those get to go into exile because of their permanents. And again, I think you could start to see the board state starting to shape itself up. Maybe next turn we could start playing, some the removal, like in Prison of the Move. I tried to target enchantment or removal because it's something we can play back out of our graveyard with Grolnok, or out of exile with Grolnok. We get Dourport Mage because of Mistbreath Elder, that loop that's going to start drawing us cards, right? I think this is Again, not a bad place to be. We're growing up on the mana. All we need now is to hit things that are going to allow us to use our mana, right? Keep getting things in exile, play more and more per turn, right? And get the party going. But let's get into playtest number 3. Keeping 2-laner with a Soul Ring, Gargantua, Willowgeist, Season of Gathering, Splash Portal, a way to blink a creature, and if it's a frog, we get to draw a card. And then, so 2-laner. So turn 1, I mean, it would make sense to get the Soul Ring down turn 1. We wouldn't get to play anything else this turn, right? And at this point, next turn, I guess it would be just Gargantua, right? So if I do that, turn 2, I don't have another colored source, right? So I'd have to get the Islet in tapped. I've got 3 mana. I could get Clement in. I could get Gargantua in. Clement would be nice, right, to start using it for mana, right? Because now this turn, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Clement for a mana, but only to cast creatures, right? So my thought is, like, you could do, Geist plus Grolnok, right? And then we couldn't attack this turn, but that's okay. Now we've set up the Willowgeist. Well, I guess let's see, could we? No, we're missing 1 color, but we could if we do that. We're just missing the color, right, for Clement. Okay. I still think it's worth getting the Willowgeist down just to set up for next turn. Then next turn, we start milling and growing the Willowgeist. I've got 3. Again, the Mistbreath Elder as well. Attack with Grolnok this turn. Mill 3's the Infestation and the Lab Maniac go. Willowgeist says whenever 1 more cards leave our graveyard. So it says whenever a permanent is put into your graveyard, exile it. So each of them is going to be separate, which is the great thing with Willowgeist. So to get 2 counters. And now, I guess it could have attacked, but we weren't sure, right, how much it was going to be actually. So now we got the Lab Maniac, we get the Infestation there. I'm here, I'm just keeping up the mana for Heroic Intervention and kind of working our way forward. The next turn, see the Mystery, which is a force. We'll keep that on top. Now, Season of Gathering is, we're 1 mana off the Gathering. I guess Mistbreath could bounce something if we wanted to. I mean, I could bounce Clement, I guess, but I don't want to bounce the Gargantua because I want it to start attacking. But at the same time, I guess it may not be attacking this turn. Clement's also not a bad attacker, right? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't really want to bounce. I guess I could bounce Grolnok and recast it, right? We don't really have anything else we're doing with it, and Grolnok doesn't necessarily need to attack this turn. We're still attacking with 1, 2, 3 frogs this turn, which is my thought. So the first one, 2 counters. Second one, 2 more counters. Third one, just 2 counters there. So Willowgeist is getting bigger, right? Now we've got access to a lot more things in exile, a couple lands, a couple creatures. We've got a decent amount. Dream Drew really works well with the Elder, right? Because it could draw us a couple cards, and then we could just bounce what we don't want, or even Froghemoth, right? Or even Clement, right? Play the Dream Drew in, have the Dream Drew go off first, do it on something, have Clement bounce that thing, right? And we could draw, and then bounce the Dream Drew to do it again, right? Having a draw outlet that way. But again, not a bad combat. Hopefully we can work towards knocking somebody out with the Willowgeist so that the Gargantua gets even bigger. Again, could be something that could be done next turn with something like Season of Gathering to make our creatures bigger. We have the Heroic Intervention, hopefully. And I think we're working our way towards it here. I think we really just need 1 more turn of something good. And I think that Exploration really helps, right? Getting 1, 2 out of exile. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. Remember, Clement can tap the them for creatures. This turn, what do I bounce? I guess I don't have to bounce anything with Miss Breath Elder. But here, right, tons of mana. We've got, like I said, that Dream Jersey Loop. We got Forkhemoth as a hasty threat this turn. We got Season of Gathering. I think I like the spot we're in. We're a little bit clunky, but I think we're in a good spot because we're extending our hand, right, with that exile. And now all we need is, I think, some ways to buff our creatures and that kind of thing. And I think we're good to go. But let me know, what do you think of Grolnok down in the comment section below. If you have a Grolnok deck, I'd love to know what you did it that was different. I'd love to have some conversations down in the comments. And